Hi, everyone. Welcome to our session. This session is entitled Seek a Better Way to Transform Workplace Zombies. I want to introduce your speaker, Steve Wiley. Steve is a certified executive leadership coach and president of Seek LLC. He founded Seek with the mission to help organizations redefine and pursue wellness. Prior to starting Seek, Mr. Wiley was an account manager at SRA International, where he was responsible for $80 million of annual business and approximately 400 employees. Mr. Wiley holds a bachelor's degree in business from the College of William and Mary and a master's degree in engineering management from George Washington. Today, he is a guest speaker at corporate events and training seminars with an emphasis on organizational wellness, intentional culture, and healthy life balance. His newly released book, Navigate Chaos, was a #1 bestseller on Amazon. Ladies and gentlemen, Steve Wiley.
Wow, well, thank you, Cheryl. It's a pleasure to be with you today. I wish I were there in person, but this certainly is the next best thing. As Cheryl mentioned, and you see on the bottom right here, we say our mission at Seek is to help organizations redefine and pursue wellness. I informally like to say I'm on a mission to rid the world of zombies in the workforce. So my intention here is, one, if you are a zombie in the workforce, I hope I inspire you to take the con and engage yourself. And if you lead or work with other zombies in the workforce, well, I hope to give you some creative ideas by which you can help inspire them and help me rid the world of zombies in the workforce. And so jumping ahead, I've got an agenda here. We're going to start by just talking, what do we mean when we say zombies in the workforce? And I'm sure many things come to mind when you hear that. And we'll talk about what that means. But more importantly, we're going to talk about engagement, what that means and why it matters. And in particular, we're going to talk about the two factors that we think have the greatest impact on engagement in organizations. And then I'm going to introduce this concept that we call intentional culture. It's about being intentional, defining the culture of the organization and how you can leverage that to address the first factor, which is the one thing that we say tends to destroy engagement in organizations. And then we'll talk about how by inspiring yourself and others, you can create an epic narrative that will really draw upon that second factor, which really enhances engagement in the organization. Eventually, I will tie these two approaches together and just show the impact that it has on any employee's journey in any organization. So again, I mentioned our mission about redefining and pursuing wellness in an organization. We define that, as you see on the left here, as a healthy, engaged, inspired workforce serving a growing or otherwise successful organization. And we contend, and it's this intentional values-based culture that's the glue between those two things. So as we get started here, I'd like to ask you a question. You can respond to this question in the chat. Think about this. How would you describe a zombie in the workforce? Generally, I think we all get the metaphor. Now, because this is a pre-recorded session, I can't respond verbally to what you're putting in there. I will be online with you, engaging in this conversation, but feel free to enter in chat. How would you describe a zombie in the workforce? And maybe there's a few things. Maybe this image comes to mind. I think about zombies in the workforce. I think about people who dread going to work. You count the hours, you count the minutes until you're done or until you can go home. You struggle. A zombie in the workforce may struggle to see how what they do connects to a higher purpose. They find no peace, no joy, no fulfillment in that which they do. You're a zombie in the workforce if you're simply going through the motions. When I speak to a live audience on this topic, I often ask the question, has anyone here seen or worked with a zombie in the workforce? And generally, every hand in the room will go up. Then I ask the question, have you ever been one? Or are you a zombie in the workforce? Very few hands tend to go up. Well, Gallup disagrees. Maybe we just don't want to admit it, but Gallup has been studying for the past 2 decades the state of the American workforce. They generally find that 2/3 of the workforce is disengaged. They're uninspired. They're going through the motions. Furthermore, Gallup actually shares the impact that this has on organizations in America. So when they compare the top quartile, those organizations scoring in the top 25% on their engagement survey versus those scoring in the bottom 25%, this is what they find. 17% higher productivity for organizations with an engaged workforce. 20% for commercial organizations having higher sales, higher outputs, higher profitability. 40% fewer quality issues. An engaged workforce has a better emphasis on quality in the organization. 41% lower absenteeism. They show up. An engaged workforce will show up. Finally, 59% lower turnover. We all know the cost in terms of time and resources to replace staff. It is good business. Now, I will tell you, I've seen these results firsthand. 15 years ago, I was and led a team of disengaged zombies. It was a small team, thankfully, because my being a zombie was infectious. But through two key initiatives that I'm going to share with you today, I actually transformed my own engagement and that of my team. And to the point where 5 years into what I call this mini sandbox experiment for me, in a company of 7,000 people, we did a company-wide engagement survey, and the account that I led scored a half point better than the average for the company. And on a 5-point scale, this is pretty darn significant. And we had the business results on top of that. We had double-digit growth year over year for 5 consecutive years. And so as this graphic tells you, and as Gallup will tell you, a healthy, engaged workforce does lead to success, a successful business. So now what I want to do is share with you what I've learned and some of the steps you could take as leaders and or trainers in organizations. Take initiative for this. So when I typically do this, I ask a variety of questions. And right now I'd like to, again, just have you in chat respond to this question. What's one thing that tends to destroy engagement most? When I do these workshops in person, I actually ask, we have an online polling system, and we generate a word cloud of the responses coming in. So I typically ask people, give me 1 or 2 word responses to this question. Again, I can't respond to what you're putting in here necessarily, but I will show you an example from one of my most recent workshops. When asked the question, what destroys engagement most? This is what they came up with. Now, my guess is, as you're dropping responses in chat, you might see some similarities here. And I contend that most of the words, most of the phrases that you will see here relate to some unmet expectation in terms of the values that someone holds or that the organization professes. You know, you see things like micromanagement here. Well, maybe we profess to value independence or innovation, yet we demonstrate micromanagement. Or maybe we value the truth, yet someone misleads. Or maybe we value trust. You see the word lack of trust here, or trust or distrust, yet someone elevates self at the expense of others. Some unmet expectation in terms of values or what's perceived to be the values of the organization. We believe that the number one thing that destroys engagement in organizations is hypocrisy. We define that as a state where the professed values of the organization differ from the demonstrated behaviors. Now, most hypocrisy in organizations, it's not intentional, it's not malicious. Hypocrisy may exist because the organization failed to articulate a shared set of values, and we're left to our own devices. More commonly, the hypocrisy exists because the organizations failed to define the standards by which you apply the core value. Do you profess collaboration yet work behind closed doors? Do you value respect yet show up pervasively late to every meeting? Do you value accountability yet allow fear and blame to persist in these organizations, the things that destroy culture? So the question becomes, what can organizations do to minimize the degree of hypocrisy, perceived or otherwise? So at Seek, we've designed a framework to develop and implement what we call an intentional culture plan. You know, if the famed management consultant, Peter Drucker, he says, culture eats strategy for breakfast. I contend, why would you have a strategic plan and not have a culture plan? So just like every great strategic plan starts with the mission and vision, this gives you your compelling vision or compelling purpose. That should be part of your culture plan, but really the foundation of the culture plan begins with your values. Most organizations have some defined values. It may be a poster on the wall in your organization. These are good. It's good to define those, but where we fail is we fail to define the standards by which the values are demonstrated and measured. And so it's simply an intentional effort to articulate those behaviors that reinforce the values, as well as those that do not and need to stop in the organization. And by doing that, you give the organization or your team a common language that they can use. And I distinguish the organization and the team because don't be a victim. If you work in a company of thousands or an agency of thousands, but you lead a team or a branch or an office of 10, you can do this in your own office. Experiment with this. We've done this with our own family. Now, you articulate a common set of behaviors that reinforce the values. That's good. But there's still some subjectivity in the application of behaviors. And this is where rituals come into play. These are operating norms that are very clear and direct application of the values and behaviors that you espouse. In most organizations, these happen by chance. This is about intentionally defining the rituals that reinforce those values and behaviors. And once you articulate the values, behaviors, and rituals, you have the foundation of an intentional values-based culture. Now at Seek, we also go into a level of detail about how do you then hire for the right fit and how do you train and communicate and coach the culture into the organization? And importantly, how do you measure? How do you measure its impact on engagement? How do you measure its impact on business results? So we do all of that. Now, I do workshops on this top layer in and of itself. I don't have the time to go through that, but I will share with you, I'll put this out in chat or be on the platform, an activity workbook that we share that will help you with the steps that you can define your own intentional culture plan. We'll give you the activities and the best way to help you facilitate this process, whether that's with your agency, your branch, your team, heck, your family. You can do it at any level that you want. Now, as part of these workshops, again, I like to ask a lot of questions. So here's an example of one of the questions I typically ask in a workshop. How many employees can recite the core values of your organization? Now, this is just the simple starting point. As you can see here in the most recent one that we did, nearly 3/4 of the respondents will say, well, maybe some or none at all can actually recite the core values of the organization. No one says all of the employees. I've never seen it. All the workshops where they say, oh yeah, everybody knows what the core values are. Now this is important, but even this, if you don't know the core values, it just opens the door for perceived hypocrisy because people fill in their own assumptions about what they are and how we all should behave. But the bigger question, as I alluded to earlier, is most employees, they may be able to recite the core values, but is there a shared understanding of how we demonstrate those core values? And this is where most organizations tend to fail. If I tell you, again, if I tell you the organization values respect, well, if the boss comes to me and says, Steve, I need you to do this assignment, need it by tomorrow, do I just salute and go about my job? Or does respect in the organization mean that we can challenge each other? We can offer alternatives. We can debate. Which is it? So the organizations need to define this. When I took over the account that I led, we established healthy balance as a foundational value by which we would we would set ourselves apart in service to each other. However, as a new account manager, I was inundated with work, and I actually established my own little ritual, which was every Saturday morning at my daughter's gym. She's a gymnast. I would take her to practice, And I would sit there and catch up on all the emails from the week. Well, that was good for my own personal balance, but guess what? A flurry of emails went out every Saturday morning to my staff. And there was a perceived hypocrisy associated with that. Now, fortunately, we had defined a set of behaviors that reinforced our core values, and some of the leaders in my account were able to challenge me on the perceived hypocrisy without judgment because we had done this work, because we had a defined set of behaviors. And this gives you an example here of just, this is the initial set of behaviors that we developed to reinforce our values of balance, integrity, accountability, and passion. Now, some of these are stated in metaphor, but we all knew in our account what these meant in application. You'll notice that there are 12 of them, by the way. Well, we would have a discussion every month. We would pick one of these and work our way through them and have a discussion about how are we doing? Does everyone understand what this means in terms of its application? And how are we doing as an organization? We took the con, we steered our ship, we created our own. The company I worked with had a great set of values. We just took it to our own level and created our culture right where we were. We were not victims. Now, behaviors, as I mentioned earlier, these are great, but there can still be subjectivity in their application. And this is where rituals come into play. And rituals are a very powerful and tangible way to reinforce your values and desired behaviors. So again, I ask a question. Throw it in the chat here. This doesn't have to be professional. Think of what is one thing that you do every day? What's one thing you do every week, every month? Would love to see some responses come back in chat. So I think about this personally. I exercise every day. Try to get a half an hour of exercise in every single day. You know, when my kids were younger, my wife and I had a hard time going out on dates or just spending one-on-one time. While they were in school, we decided to have a weekly lunch date. We carry that on to this date. So I exercise every day. I do a weekly lunch date with my wife. On a monthly basis, once a month, I volunteer in youth ministry at my church. These are things, these are rituals I have established in my personal life. As you see the responses coming in on chat, as you think about your own rituals, as you think about what I offer, the question I ask is, what does this say about that which you and or others value? We encourage every team to be intentional about the rituals or the operating norms that you establish. Make them a clear application of one or more of your values and behaviors. Also, we encourage you need to revisit your rituals, I would say at least yearly. While your values may be stable for a long time, even your behaviors may be somewhat stable, your rituals can change, and they probably should change. Certainly, they should change in periods of disruption like COVID-19 or a global pandemic. You need to revisit your rituals, but make sure they're a clear reflection of that which you value. I'm going to share with you some examples of this in our own organization. So at Seek, my company, we say we value a broader definition of integrity. As part of that, we have an associated behavior statement to honor your wholeness. We believe that gratitude promotes wellness, promotes wholeness, promotes integrity of each and every individual. Well, we have a daily stand-up call where everyone in our organization, we're on the phone for 15 minutes and we give just what did we accomplish yesterday? What are we going to accomplish today? And then we end every update with a statement of gratitude. This becomes a clear reflection of us. You can replicate it if you want, but this is the Seek culture. This is who we are. It's a reflection of our values. This occurs every day without fail. Kind of in a similar line, the same value of integrity and honoring our wholeness. We actually dedicate time on a weekly basis. Each one of us schedule a window in normal working hours where we disconnect to reconnect. We call it our analog time. We get off the computer, we get off the phone, and each and every one of us can do that which fills our tank. You can go for a walk, you can read, you can exercise, you can spend the time in meditation or prayer, whatever it is that allows you to reconnect. This is one of our rituals. This is what we do. It's intentional reapplication of a core value that we hold in a behavior. Now, at the same time, we actually do consistent with our value of accountability. We want to be accountable to the culture that we are establishing. And so every month, without fail, we pick a behavior and or a value or a ritual, and we have a conversation about how we're doing about that. So holding yourselves accountable in a non-judgmental way, recognizing our goal is to minimize the degree of hypocrisy or perceived hypocrisy in the organization. You do these things, you will enhance the culture of the organization. You'll prevent this disengagement through hypocrisy. And you will also, through these rituals, differentiate your organization in service to yourselves, to your clients, your colleagues, your community. Be intentional about your values, your behaviors, and rituals. Don't be a victim. Don't say it's someone else's job. Wherever you are in an organization, take the initiative. Make it happen. So that really brings us to, that covers that first factor, which tends to destroy engagement. Now the question is, okay, if we prevent disengagement, now what do we do to just enhance engagement? And so again, I would love to see your responses in the chat. What's one thing that advances engagement most? As I mentioned before, I typically do this in live workshops. We'll have a poll that will go out, people will text in their responses, and we generate a word cloud. So show you an example again of what that looked like from a recent session that we held. You can see the words. Maybe there's similar words coming into the chat right now of what people believe really advances engagement. Now, as I look at these, I contend that most of these responses actually relate to that which destroys engagement. They're kind of the counter of that in some way. But if, I see words like honest in here. Well, I don't think anyone ever says, oh man, my boss was honest this week. I'm pretty fired up about my job. No, not really the way it works. And accountability, having a culture of accountability, things of that nature in here. You don't hear your colleagues saying, oh boy, my colleagues followed through on their commitments this week. I just love what I do. So they're kind of the counter. No one typically, many of these things, as I said, they are expectations that we have to prevent disengagement. So we contend that what advances engagement most in any organization or with an individual is an energy and enthusiasm of fulfillment in that which you do. We call it passion. Have you ever met a disengaged zombie that you'd say they're really passionate about their work? No. Disengaged zombies are going through the motions. They're flatlined. They see no real connection to a purpose. They're not bringing the best versions of themselves. Now, you and I, we can't give passion to someone else. However, we can help draw it out of them. But before you can draw a passion out of someone else, you need to draw it out of yourself. This is a direct quote from Gallup's State of the American Workforce report. How you show up matters. I don't care if you're the boss or just the colleague. Our level of engagement can be infectious, especially if you're in a supervisory position. So before you can start to engage others, you've got to figure out how to engage yourself. So let's talk about what you can do in organizations. See, these are our core values: passion, integrity, and creativity. We like to say that it's the creative application of a passion sustained with integrity that creates an epic narrative. An epic is a long, compelling, good story. Unfortunately, it's awesome if you work in an organization where you are passionate about the mission, you're passionate about what you do, what your job is. Unfortunately, that's not the case for most of us. If you want a great paying job, you can't necessarily connect it directly to that which you're passionate about or the abilities that you may have. Heck, I grew up with a passion for football. I wanted to be the next quarterback for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Unfortunately, what I lacked in size, I made up for with the lack of speed. So it wasn't in the cards for me. I ended up as a enterprise architect providing IT consulting support services. Why? I'm not even really sure. I worked for a company that said our vision is to be one of the best companies in the world by any measure. Like, was I inspired by my job or this company vision? Heck no. However, I actually learned something over time at kind of a low point in my career that with a little creativity, I could draw out a passion to fundamentally change how I viewed my job, how I showed up. The how matters. Simon Sinek talks about the why, but you can be inspired through how you do what you do. So I discovered an incredibly powerful tool to draw out a passion. Call it job crafting. When I was at a low point in my career, I reflected on the people who inspired me by what they did. Some of them were famous, highly successful people. Some of them were not. And quite honestly, I was more drawn to those that were not. And one woman stood out more than anyone among that group. Her name was Ernestine Jackson. And I crossed paths with Ernestine as a student at the College of William and Mary from 1989 to 1993. And anyone who went to the college in the 80s or 90s, they know Ernestine Jackson. Now, Ernestine was not an administrator. She was not a professor. She was not a coach. Ernestine was a cafeteria worker. She served food. But that's not how Ernestine viewed her job. Ernestine defined her job. She was there to serve souls. And it's all about how she showed up each and every day. Ernestine Jackson was a surrogate mother, friend, teacher, coach to the thousands of students that crossed her path every year. I could go on and on about the recognition. They now have an Ernestine Award at the college. I later discovered and I will drop this in the chat as well. There's a professor at Yale School of Management. Her name is Dr. Amy Wisniewski. And she did a study on she really articulated what it means to craft your job. And she did a study of hospital maintenance workers on job crafting and the impact that it had on their engagement. And again, I'll share the link to that video, but I easily connected her insights about the impact of job crafting to engagement, connected all of that to Ernestine Jackson. Ernestine decided to define her job on her own terms. I decided to do the same. 15 years ago, when I was at a low point in my career, I wrote my first ever strategic plan. First thing I did. And then I rewrote my job description. My boss didn't even know it. I was an enterprise architect leading a team of about 10 people at the time I wrote this job description. As a result, I creatively sought new ways to inspire and empower my colleagues in my job. I still did my job as it was defined, but this fundamentally changed how I showed up each and every day. 7 years later, after crafting my job description, I led an account of 400 people. It's a greater platform. I then started my own consulting company with this job description as the foundation for the mission of my company. It's the reason why I'm here with you today. Now at Seek, we put this concept into practice, and I encourage you to do the same. Teach people how to craft their job, how to define their job in terms of how, not just what they do, how they can show up a more inspired self. At Seek, every employee, when they start, we write our ideal job description. And from that ideal job description, we actually come up with creative titles, these chief titles that you see that are a reflection of that which each of us is passionate about. It becomes self-fulfilling. And it's a reminder to each other about where we want to engage people and what they can do. This is the Seek team. This is what we are passionate about. I encourage you, craft your job, draw out your own passion, practice this with yourself, inspire yourself before you inspire others. Like Ernestine Jackson, consider how you do what you do as much as what you do and why you do it. And teach and encourage others in your organization to do the same. That will drive engagement. So as we wrap this up, here's the bottom line. When anyone joins a new organization, they may be excited about their job, but they're neither engaged nor disengaged. You and the organization have an opportunity to do that on their behalf, to help engage them or disengage. If the individual perceives that the professed values differ from demonstrated behaviors in the organization, that there's a perceived hypocrisy, their engagement's going to tank. I encourage you to define and apply a values-based culture and behavioral standards for those values. Be intentional about it. You do that, you'll prevent the disengagement. But if the employee is able to connect with, if you're able to help them, help yourself, help them draw upon a passion, then the employee will quickly join and enhance that 1/3 of the workforce that Gallup says is engaged, is inspired by what they do. Empower yourself and your team to create an epic narrative. Introduce and train your staff on the art of job crafting to align with a passion. And then as engagement soars, measure the impact on your business. Whatever your objectives may be, I'm convinced, as Gallup tells us, you'll see a correlation. So there you have it, just bottom line. Hey, zombies have overtaken the workforce. Gallup tells us this year over year. I want to enroll you to help change the numbers, flip the script, start with yourself. Engagement matters, take ownership. Define an intentional values-based culture to eliminate the hypocrisy. Don't be a victim and say that's someone else's responsibility. I don't care, again, if you lead a team of 3 or an organization of thousands or a family of 4. Do this work. Eliminate the hypocrisy and take the initiative to figure out a way that you can inspire yourself, create an epic narrative, the creative application of a passion sustained with integrity. Use that to craft your job description. How you show up matters. It's infectious. You do these things, you'll help me rid the world of zombies in the workforce. Thank you for your time today.